Hi, Heather. Thanks for being on my podcast.
Hi, Jody. Thank you so much. It's my pleasure.
You know what, Heather? We were just talking, and oh my goodness, we're trying to remember exactly how we met. And I know it was Hope Riders. We didn't actually meet at the retreat in 2019. It was after that. And sadly, we were both walking through similar things in our marriage, and we connected. If I remember correctly, you reached out to me for prayer through Instagram. Then we started talking on the phone, and we just kind of touch base every couple months and see how you were doing. And I don't know. I think that's how it happened. Is that kind of what you remember?
Roughly, I don't remember the initial contact, but I know we did chat on Instagram first, and then we moved to the telephone.
Yeah. You know what? I definitely think it was meant to be that we met because you and I both have walked similar heartbreaks in that we've walked through a divorce. And that's something that not everyone can understand and understand not only the death of a marriage, but also some of the feelings of hurt and betrayal. And so today I'm really excited to have you on the podcast, Heather, for a couple reasons. One, you're a dear friend of mine, and I feel like it's been a joy to kind of I already messed up. It's a joy to watch you walk through your journey. But second, the letter that I'm going to focus on today from my book is Tearfully Allow Yourself Time to Grieve and Process the Emotions. And I just think that it's hard to walk through a divorce. It's hard to walk through any grief, but I just excited for us to kind of dive deeper into sharing how we did that. But before we get to that, why don't you share a little bit about your story?
Sure. I got into ministry in roughly 2021. I started writing in 2019 in the middle of a destructive marriage, and writing was my outlet. And so I started writing through my destructive marriage on a blog, and then it just grew from there. My husband and I separated in 2020, divorced in 2021. And from there, God laid it on my heart to really be a mentor and share information with other women. There's not a lot of Christian resources for women going through divorce and abuse in marriage. So God laid it on my heart to speak into that area. And that's what I've been doing since, walking through it myself. So now I have an online ministry for mentoring, sharing information, and just encouraging others who are either in destructive marriages, difficult relationships. It doesn't have to be marriage, or walking through divorce and single parenting, in those first few months and years, and really speaking to women in that season of life.
I love that. You're right. There isn't a lot of resources out there. And I think that's something we talked about before is just how important it is to come out along others and support them through it. Because again, no one chooses this path. No one wants to be divorced, but sometimes it's out of our control and it's something that happens. And so then how do we come and support these women? And so let's start with just how handled the emotions. So I have a section in my book, a chapter called Facing the Emotions, and I give lots of different steps that I did that were real practical. But before we kind of go into that, what were something that you did that you really think helped you, again, grieve and process those hard emotions you were experiencing with the divorce?
Well, and I love that chapter. I can't wait to talk about that. But that was one of the foundational things. Honestly, when I was going through that time of my life, Jody, I had no idea what to do. I didn't know how to do it. I had no real guidance. No one in my family. I have some friends who are divorced, but it was a totally different situation. I will disclose that there was emotional and spiritual abuse in my marriage. So it wasn't a typical, marriage is hard scenario. So in that, I really leaned on God. God, I don't know what to do here. And I really didn't. I didn't have a clue. I was at the end of my rope, and I said, God, what do I do? And one thing at a time, he slowly revealed things to me. I connected with worship music. And so I would start my day with worship music blaring in my bathroom while I was taking a shower, and
So
start
good.
my day just singing and worshiping. And, I had a playlist that was titled Warfare, Spiritual Warfare.
Oh,
And
I
that was my
love the
warfare
title.
playlist. Yes. And that was, okay, start my day with positivity and, setting the stage that, God's helping me fight my battles. So just the simplest thing, starting my day that way made such a difference. If I was in a hurry one day and didn't turn on the music and set it up before I started getting ready, I could tell. So I love your list. And that's one of the things, music and journaling I was a journaler in high school, maybe early college, but I hadn't really journaled in almost 20 years.
Mm,
And I just found it easier to write things out, write down my thoughts, write down my feelings. Because, as you know, when you're in the middle of grief and trying to process everything, you can't think straight.
right.
So journaling was a big one for me. And,
Mm.
just spending daily time in the word. These were, I've identified as a Christian most of my life, Jody, but I didn't practice any of this until it came down to it.
You know what? It's interesting you say that because on the back cover of the book, I say, what if your greatest heartbreak catapulted you to your greatest growth? And I would also think I was a strong Christian before any of my heartbreaks, but then the rug gets pulled out from under you and you realize, wait a minute, I guess I'm not as much into the word or relying on God as I thought I was, right? Because now it was just this deeper intimacy, this deeper level of connection with God in the middle of it than I had before, And so I do think that's very common for a lot of people when they are walking through these heartbreaks is their faith deepens. And that is one of the things that I am so passionate about, helping people grow deep roots in their faith. And I hate to say it, friends, it's through heartbreak sometimes, that's not the path. It's not the path people want to hear, but I do think that it can be the path God uses. And so I love that you said you were in the word. So I'm going to kind of go through the different things that I wrote in that chapter and we'll just kind of talk about it. So the first one said spend time with God. And for me, this was like directly proportional to how much I could handle the grief. So I, again, like you, a couple mornings, you get busy. Like you said, you didn't listen to the worship music. I didn't get my journal opened up or my Bible or let me say, I didn't get my devotional opened up and get into my Bible. And I remember that was one of the hardest days in the grief. I cried. And then it's so funny because that night I went back and read what I would have read that morning, Heather, if I had opened the devotional that went with my Bible story that I was reading. And it was exactly what I needed that day. But of course,
Yes.
I didn't. So I don't know. Tell me about you with time spent with God. I know you said worship music, but you also read your Bible. Did you read it with a devotional? Did you just open up a word book of the Bible? How'd you do it?
Well, I started reading devotionals. I got one of Lisa Turker's devotional books, like a daily
Mm,
devotional.
so
And I
good. Yes.
started reading, oh, I'm blanking on the name of it, Jesus Calling. I
Oh,
started
yes.
reading, yes, I
Love
started reading
Jesus
Jesus
calling.
Calling, and I just fell in love with the hope that, was coming through these daily devotionals. But I got to the point where finally I said to myself, okay, I need to know what the Bible says about divorce, and I need to know what it says in context. And I would look up verses and it just nothing was coming together. It didn't make sense why, this verse would say, stay away from these things. And then this verse would say, you know, God hates divorce, so to speak. We can talk about that later because that's not an accurate translation, but that's what I was reading at the time.
Yes.
Um, so I'm like, God, I don't understand why there seems to be this back and forth. And I really felt the Holy Spirit nudge me and say, have you read my word start to finish? Would you open up
Mm.
any other book? Would you open up Jody Rosser's book on page 83 and read what's there and expect it to make sense when you haven't read the rest of the book? We wouldn't read any
Mm.
other book that way.
So
So the
good.
Holy Spirit really nudged me to start reading in Genesis 1. And so I did that. January came, and I started a read the Bible in a year. I started with Tara Cobble in the Bible recap. I don't know if you've
No,
followed
that
that.
sounds cool. No, that sounds
Yeah, it was
great.
the first year that she had done it. I actually heard of her on a podcast. I don't remember who I was listening to, but she was a guest on the podcast, and she said she was starting this Bible reading plan on January 1st. And it went through the whole year. You read, so many chapters, it was chronological. And then she had a podcast 5 minutes afterwards that explained it and, just a little summary. So I thought, oh, that's perfect. So I started reading the Bible in Genesis. And as I went through the Bible the first time that year, the first time I've ever
Mm.
read the Bible in order, start to finish.
Wow,
Oh,
that's so great.
it was so powerful. But I still didn't have the answers I was looking for. And so December came of that year and God said, do it again. And I'm
Hmm.
like, okay, I'll do it again. Cause I really look forward to that time. So, when your marriage is falling apart and you have young kids who go to bed, say 9 o'clock, you have some time in the evening, to yourself because, we weren't hanging out together. We weren't doing any of those things. So I had Bible study time 2 to 3 hours every night. It was just God and me. So I would read my chronological Bible study and then I would do another Bible study at the time, whatever, I wanted to work through at that time. Um,
That
but
is
God,
so powerful.
he said, do it again. And I'm
Mm.
like, okay, do it again. End of the second year, Jody, I'm like, okay, now the first time I read the Bible start to finish, I understood who God was a little bit better, his character. The second time I read the Bible through, I understood who I was in relation to who God was.
Ooh, that's good.
And I get to
Really
December,
good.
Jody, in December, the second time, I said, God, I still don't understand where you stand on this divorce and marriage concept. Like, what do I do? And he said, read it again.
Wow.
So I spent 3 years really kind of studying, looking for answers. In that third year, God revealed, he put it all together for me. And it was really powerful, and his timing was so perfect.
Oh
But
my
in those
gosh.
3 years, you talk about depth and growing your roots, and that's exactly what I was doing. God knew that I was going to go through this storm, but I had to be prepared.
I love that. Because when you think about storms, they don't give you warning, right? Like you're on vacation right now and we had to postpone the interview for an hour because a storm came blowing through, right? Like we don't know they're coming, friends. Like storms come into your life unexpected. And so you have to be ready. And for me, I feel like my divorce just knocked me off my feet. When my friend passed away, that was 2 years later. God had taught me so much. I feel like I was kind of prepared. I guess that's maybe not even the word I'd use, but I
Mhm.
had more tools in my tool belt, maybe I could say, to weather that storm. But I love that you're talking about growing your roots deep before. I think it can happen during as well. That's what happened for me too. But I just think it's important to get in God's word. And so we're ready when the storm does come, or that's what gets us into the word when the storm is blazing at us, right? And so I love what you said though about reading the Bible all the way through. So it's funny, I use the First Five app. Do you know that app by Proverbs
Yes,
31
I
Ministries?
that was one of my Bible study tools at the time.
Yeah, so I just did it, starting in Genesis, and I read and I mean, it came alive. I was telling people, Bible's so amazing. And people were like, what's going on with Jody? I was like, I'm reading this. And, it was just so exciting. And I just don't know if I had experienced that before. And again, I have been, like you said, walking the Christian life for a long time, but that's when this depth of my faith happened in the middle of these storms. Okay, so another one I have is surround yourself with people who care. And I also will tag that on to join a support group. So I did not do that necessarily for all of my heartbreaks, but my miscarriage, there was a support group at our church called Empty Arms, and it was for women. Actually, it was for the spouse too, but to come and just share because people in the group also had either lost a baby to miscarriage or maybe it was a full term loss, but it was an infant loss, and it was just this way that you would talk with other people and they could understand, right? Where I would talk about this harsh thing someone said, and we could take it there and people can work through it with me and help me kind of see like, again, that again, so people say horrible things sometimes they don't even mean, but like they help me work through it. And so I don't, did you do a support group? I'm trying to remember if you did one.
I did not. Now, a lot of what I was walking through was in the pandemic, in the beginning of the pandemic. So late
Mm,
2019 and then all of 2020. Um, so I actually had an online support group.
okay.
Um, I
Yeah.
prayed. It was funny, Jody. I prayed to God at one point in time and I said, God, I don't have any women in my life or mentors or, I'd reached out to women in my church, but, you hear the word divorce or separation and people get scared. They don't really want to draw near to that.
Mm,
Um, and so
I
that
get
was a
that.
little bit hard for me at that time. I felt like I was reaching in all these directions and I wasn't really grasping anything. So I prayed, God, can you send me some women? Can you send me a mentor? Can you, show me where I'm supposed to go? And when you pray that prayer, be ready.
I love it.
Um, Yeah, so I had an online mentor who I also met on Instagram, and we have just formed the most beautiful friendship for several years now. But I joined an online support group for women in narcissistic abusive marriages. Now, this one was not Christian. Okay, and that's very
Interesting.
common. Yeah, which was one of the things that led me to start my ministry is there's a lot of you hear a lot of things about narcissistic abuse, but for Christian women trying to navigate it biblically, it's tricky.
Yeah.
So there were a few women in this group. We had kind of identified ourselves as, okay, well, we're Christian and we understand what you're saying here, but how do we apply that? So we kind of formed our own little group on Messenger,
Mm,
kind of like what our Hope Circle did for Hope Writers. And so we
yes.
would message each other, hey, we learned to bring things to the table. We didn't really want to violate the privacy of our spouses, but at the same time, we didn't know how to process certain things. So we would bring to the table, okay, this is the conversation we had. What do I do with this? Or, this is how do I navigate my children through this particular moment? And it was really helpful. And that's
Yeah.
when, God really lit into me that, what, I want you to mentor women.
Yes. And with the biblical basis, which I love, Heather, because your title of your website or your name on Instagram for many years was Straighten Your Crown, which is just all
Mhm.
about our identity in Christ. And so I love that you can bring that to the table as well as this is the struggle I'm walking through. How do we take the two together and find a way to do this where we're still putting God first, we're still relying on God, but we're also realize this is really difficult. And so we need support. We need other people. We need people to surround us that are walking the same thing, but have the same faith. I kind of call it faith friends. You can interlock tree roots with people that maybe don't have the same belief as you. And I just think sometimes that could be a little not nerve wracking. That's not the word. It could be a little scary because they may be sharing things with you that maybe don't match with what your faith is. So I love that group, that those people in that group, you guys kind of formed your little subgroup, right? And you kind of drifted off into this other group that was really a group that had the similar faith, because I think that's really important. And when people are looking in for support groups, and again, I'm glad that you found that one for you, but I really think churches are such a great place to at least have some, like the Empty Arms group I went to, or I know they have cancer support groups. I know they have divorce care group. They have that at our church. So there's that faith aspect as well. So I love that it's both, you can have, and I love what you do with your ministry. I love that you're coming along women and helping them because it is lonely. And I remember my counselor said to me, you just don't want to grieve alone. Like that is something like it's not, you're not supposed to, if you think about it, you're supposed to invite God into it. You need that like vertical, right? But then you also need the horizontal of like friends and family to support you. And speaking of a therapist, one of my other ones was talk with a therapist or professional counselor. So this is like big for me. I don't know what I would do without my counselor
Mhm.
Debbie. We actually do a podcast interview last year, so I'll link it to this because she has so many great pearls. But I think you did counseling too, right? If I remember correctly, you were in counseling as well.
I did. Yeah. Of course, in the middle of the pandemic,
Yes, you had it
um,
hard with the pandemic, Heather. I'm so sorry.
it was really a crazy time. I worked in healthcare at the time, and I mean, I still do, but I was smack in the middle of healthcare in the middle of a pandemic, working through an abusive marriage that was coming to an end. And, I just got to the point where my health was failing. I just
Mm.
didn't feel good physically. And, I knew that there was a lot of physical components. I wasn't drinking enough water, et cetera. But I also knew my mental health was not where it needed to be. And that was playing a big part. So I did seek out counseling for myself. I didn't jump into marriage counseling at the time. It was very clear that reconciliation was not on the table at the time. Um, so I just went for myself, and it really saved my life.
I think it's important to seek that help. And I know it gets expensive. People always say, wow, I'm like, oh, the amount of money I spent. But you know what? It was such an investment in myself because here's the thing. Whether you save the marriage, you don't save the marriage, whether you're divorced or you're not divorced, whether you're grieving the loss and it has nothing to do with divorce, you are this one thing that's going to be the constant, right? You're going to be
Mhm.
going into that next relationship. You're going to be having to parent your kids through grief. You're going to have to all the things, right? So you got to be the best version of yourself. And you have to, in order, I shouldn't say you have to, in order, I think, in order to be the best version for me, the counselor helped me so much see
Yeah.
triggers and see areas where maybe there were blind spots that I couldn't see, so many things that I don't think I guess God and his, provision could have dropped all that into my head, but I just think he used my counselor to provide that for me. So that's for me was super important. It sounds like for you it was also really helpful.
Yeah, and I agree with you, Jody, that God does use people in our lives for, his purposes. And, I prayed for a Christian counselor. That was the one thing it had to be faith-based counseling. And I
Yes,
waited a long time to find that. It was, a lot of people didn't take my insurance. When I finally did find the counselor that I found, she was able to work out a sliding scale payment for me. Because,
perfect.
there's another area that needs some major work is the mental
I
health
know.
care system.
I know.
Um,
Because to get a good counselor, it's hard to find them with your insurance. So I was always just paying out of pocket. And again, it was a huge investment, but it was worth it. But you're right. For some people, maybe that's not an option. So I love that you said that, Heather, that you took time and you found the right one. Because sometimes I think people don't want to do counseling because they either didn't find the right one or they had a bad experience with someone. So you have to keep trying till you find that right fit because it's kind of like a relationship, right? Like a friendship, even, or, like you got to keep trying till you find the right person because there's depth to that relationship and there's a lot that you share that you have to feel safe, you have to feel connected, you have to feel like they have the same values and faith as you. And so I love that you kept trying till you found someone and then you did. And it was such a gift in the middle of the storm because there's just something about that outside perspective that they bring that they can share. And you're just like, oh, or they connect this with something in your childhood and you're like, aha, this aha moment of this is the way I do, or this is why my kids, when they do this, I blow up or I stuff it and withdraw or whatever it is you do, right? Like they give you this insight that I just I just thought was so helpful. So I love that we both talked about that and we both sought counseling to help with our grief because I do think you can grieve without it, but I think it's so much more truth and depth into your life when you have a Christian counselor. Okay, so we've got journal your emotions. Now we talked about this already, but I want to kind of hear how you did it. So for me, Heather, I hope someday if I die that those journals all get burned because I'm telling you the amount of stuff that was written in there, you know, there was swearing, there was everything. Because you know what? It's got to come out of you. The grief's got to come through you, right? It's got to come
mhm.
out. And so I let it all out in that journal. I tell you, if something about my pen started writing and whatever was in my head just can't download it out. If I tried to tell you it, I couldn't do it as well, but just letting like maybe because we're writers, who knows, Heather, but it just came out of us. And so I would love to hear your process.
Yeah, mine was the same way as far as I didn't have a lot of words to speak it at that time. I really needed to process on paper. I'm a visual learner. I process things visually. So I started out just kind of brain mapping what was going on. I would write in
Mm,
the middle of the page, I'd draw a big circle and write like 5 things I was feeling. And then from there, I would just branch out and say, okay, this made me feel this way today. And I did that for everything, but then I had several journals. So I had a
yes.
prayer journal where I wrote my prayers. That one is in a safe under lock and key right now because that was my nothing is off limits to God.
Mm,
Um,
I love that.
yeah, I'm not sure what I'll ever do with it. Like you said, it probably should be burned one day, but at the same time, there's raw emotion. And when I'm mentoring women, I go back to that journal sometimes. What was I feeling and thinking in this point
Yes.
in time? And I do find it helpful. I also started just my Bible study journal. So I have volumes of Bible study journals. I bought, nice hardcover notebooks for them because, I don't know that my kids will ever want them or appreciate them later in life. But that was my thought is I'm leaving basically a trail for my children of what I've
So cool.
learned through this time. Now, of
I
course,
love
I
that. You
didn't
have two
teach
daughters, so
people.
I
Yes.
love that. You have two daughters. I think they'll appreciate it more than my sons would. So I love that the daughters. I think they will appreciate that, Heather. I think that'll be a gift that they will love and cherish.
Yeah, and it just left a trail of what I was learning, what I was gaining from biblical wisdom, and not details about my marriage or my relationships, just life lessons, what I was gleaning from the Bible, and thank you prayers. Like if I wrote a praise prayer, of thanks in my journal, I wanted them to see, like, and I didn't do it with them in mind every time, it was truly just me and God. But
Yeah.
after maybe the second notebook, I thought, you know what? Because one thing I wished, Jody, is that my great grandmother, I wish I could sit down and have a conversation with her and really
Mm.
speak to her on a spiritual level, because I wanted her wisdom and insight, but she wasn't there. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to put this down so that if nothing else, I can leave that for my children and they have that, even if I'm not here.
It's such a beautiful legacy. Yeah. So good. Oh my gosh, Heather, you have shared so many good things. I love what you were saying too about the journal. For me, I started with my lament. I would start with my frustration. I love that you did it like a map, the emotions in the middle. I think naming the emotions is so huge. So let's put some thought or let's talk about this for a little bit, because for some people, I think for many people, they don't know how to name their emotions. Like I didn't. I don't know if you grew up with people helping you do this, but I knew the basics. I'm sad, I'm mad, I'm happy or glad. But basically I was like a toddler. That's what a toddler knows. As an adult, there's disappointment and there's worry. And I mean, I think I just didn't know how to identify him. And so it was all just under this umbrella of whatever didn't happen right, just went right into anger. But so my counselor helped me process that and learn it. So I love in your map that you name the emotions in the middle, but I would, let's just say, write it all out. So I'm sad and talk about why I'm sad. I'm angry and maybe list out all the reasons I'm angry or whatever it is. And then I would end, though, not there. I wouldn't leave that. I would then turn it and say, but yet, God, I know. And then I would state something I knew. Maybe I didn't even believe it at that day. Like, God, I've heard that you are always there. You never leave us nor forsake us. I know that's a promise in the Bible. So I'm claiming that today. Or sometimes I had more trust and I'd say, God, I know that you are close to the broken heart. So, there was times it was more of a, I have heard this and I hope this is true. And sometimes it was like, I believe it today. So, but I would try to add something positive, not necessarily positive. That's not the right word. A promise, a truth about God. Your character never changes. You are, um, gosh, I don't even faithful, just things that I would knew. I would try to add that in. And I know you can get me through this. I've seen you do it for someone else. I know you can do it for me. It was kind of like that. I don't know. For me, that was really, really helpful. And I think that kind of goes along with this one, guard your heart and fill your mind with truth, because I don't think we can list promises in our journal unless we've learned some promises of God. It means we got to fill our minds with truth. And I think that goes along with the reading the Bible. I think it goes along with the worship songs that you were feeding into your head every morning. There's so much great worship music that has Bible verses in it, or just the songs that just the faithfulness of God. And so tell me how you filled your mind with truth besides the worship songs and the reading of the Bible, or how did you guard your mind for social media? I know this was big for me. I had to get off of it for a short time, especially in the summer months where everyone posted their happy anniversary posts. I'm so happy and da 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 da. And I'd be like, I can't read this right now. I don't know. Did you have to guard your mind for stuff like that?
I did. So one of the first things I did was go through my social media, and because there are a lot of triggers in social media, and I
Yes.
went through my social media and I found pages that really encouraged me and inspired me, and I added them as my favorites. And I would put show first, my Facebook preferences, show first. So in the morning when I woke up or whenever and was scrolling through my Facebook, it would take me a long time to get down to, actual friends and family posts. The first things that were coming in my feed were encouragement, truth, biblical, things that were encouraging to me. And
I
so
love that. So good.
it really, I just revamped my feed on Facebook. I wasn't on Instagram at the time. Um, but I would have done the same thing, following pages that really encouraged me and lifted me up. There were some things that I unfollowed. There were some
Wise.
people that I had to hide. anything that exuded anger and bitterness, that was something in my soul I did not want to feed. So, we've all had friends who like to vent on Facebook. So, I had to stay friends, but hide posts or whatever that option is.
Yes. Yes,
So I
yes.
really took charge of what I was feeding into my brain every day, from the worship music to the social media, and really put in positivity, because when you're walking through narcissistic abuse, there's a stage called devaluation where you are basically devalued as a person. And you have to really, to get through that, you had to fill your mind with truth. And, like you talked about the worship songs, what I loved about the worship songs is, as I'm listening to them and I'm reading through the Bible more and more, they're making more sense.
That's so cool.
I knew about the walls of Jericho falling, but maybe I didn't, when it said that, just ask the man who was thrown on the bones of Elisha. I didn't know what that meant until I started reading through the Bible. And then all of these songs started having a deeper meaning for me.
I love that. That is so cool. Because you know what? I think songs are powerful. I think there's something about words to music that just touch us in a certain way in our hearts. And so to now understand the Bible stories that were behind these songs in such a deep way, because you were reading the Bible at the same time, is just such a beautiful gift that God gave you in the middle of your grief. And I also want to say to someone out there that maybe they're not walking through the divorce, because not everyone listening to this episode, that's going to be their heartbreak. But grief, when you're going through, you got to fill your mind with truth, no matter what the cause of the grief is, whether it's a miscarriage, or you have a cancer diagnosis, or you just lost a friend or a loved one in a car accident, or whatever the problem that's causing, I shouldn't say problem, whatever the heartbreak is, you want to be feeding truth into your mind, because you are going to have days where you're really down, and it's okay to feel those emotions and be down and name them and say, this is how I'm feeling, and don't try to jump to something positive right away. But when you're ready, you want the truth to be what's going back in your head, and you want it to be grounded in God's word. And so I love that, like you were sharing, Heather, the worship songs just did that for you. And I love that you were reading the scripture at the same time and they were coming alive. That just makes me so happy to hear. Okay, the next one, practice self-care. Oh, this is one that's hard, because I think we're in survival mode sometimes in grief. And so we're just trying to keep our head above water. Maybe you can relate to this. I feel like a wave would come and it was like, take a breath, another way, and it was like, how am I supposed to be practicing self-care? I could barely get out of bed. Or so
Right.
for me personally, this was one I needed to make sure I was really getting to bed at a decent hour and get a good night's sleep, and just all those things that can really help you in the middle of grief. So tell me what some of your self-care practices were.
Well, one of the first things I did, especially once I only had my children every other weekend,
Yes.
I needed to fill that time. I just being in a quiet house by myself. I later learned to cherish that. And I think you had told me in a conversation on the phone when we were talking during that time, you told me that I would eventually get used to that and I would look forward to that time. When
Yes.
we had that conversation, I thought, Jody is crazy. How am I ever going to look forward to this? Eventually I did. You were right. But in the
It was
beginning,
such a growing let me just do a quick little disclaimer, so people are like, "What is she talking about?" It was just such a growing time with me and God when I had those big chunks of time with just me and God, and when my kids were gone. That's why he just showed up in ways he didn't when it was the crazy, right? So that's what I meant by, no one loves to just be alone, but it was like I wasn't. It was I was purposeful in that time of spending it with God, and I think you were as well, Heather. And that's why it was just became this
exactly.
amazing time of growth and depth in our faith. But keep going.
Yeah, not that we enjoyed not having our children around, but it was a time for us to connect in more intimate ways with
Yes.
God than what we could do, while we're packing lunches and making sure everyone has dinner and everyone else is getting to bed, and
Yes.
all of the things that come with parenting. Um, but yeah, another thing I did is I joined. So on Saturday mornings when I didn't have the girls, I joined a walking club,
I
and
love that.
there was accountability. I not only on a Saturday morning, I was getting up, I was at the park by 9 a.m., joining other women. We were having conversation. I was getting my fresh air. And granted, this was in January and February, but it was cold outside. I live in
Yeah.
Maryland and it's cold in January and February. But I was getting outside, I was getting fresh air, and I was seeing creation. And for me, that's always been huge. I really connect with God, through creation, just birds fluttering by, or, a cardinal is sitting in the path ahead of me. I don't look at those as coincidences. I look at those as there's some communication from God, a God wink, or,
Hmm.
God saying, I see you. Um,
Yeah.
so I
Especially
just
because the
love
verse is
getting
about
it.
the birds, you don't all about worry and look how I take care of the birds. And so I think that's a
Yeah.
beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. So just
So you,
getting out, walking and exercising, that was my self-care. And then afterwards, like you said, I would come home and I would spend some time one-on-one with God. And that was my quiet time for growth.
yeah, I think when I was sharing all that with you, which is, I love that you brought that up, by the way, because I do remember telling you that. Um, I, I remember for me it was like, I'm gonna read, and I'm gonna read at the beach because you know what? That is my place to go and just fill up. And so the kids would be gone, and it was, not all the time, but I'd have these weekends where they were like up visiting grandparents or something, and I would just go and I would read like a whole book at the beach, and I would just have this day, and it was like so purposeful and just so much time with God, but also just feeding my soul too. So that's why I think self-care is important during the time of grief for anyone that's walking through grief. Take care of yourself the best you can because you have to be pouring into others, especially if you're a single parent. Oh, it's so hard. It's so hard. And both Heather and I can vouch that it is difficult. And there's times you just crash into bed at night because you're so exhausted. But when you have those pockets of time where it's just you, do something that's going to fill you up. Um, and it could even be something as simple as a massage and a pedicure. It could be something more in depth, like reading a book but again, just take care of yourself. Okay, the last one, give yourself time and grace. I think people want to rush grief. I don't know if people try
Yeah.
to rush you, Heather, but it's like grief can't be rushed. Everyone grieves at their own pace, one. So whether I grieve differently than you, that doesn't matter. We both are going to take our time, but people want you to get to the other side and know you're going to be okay. And they try to rush us sometimes. And I want to tell someone right now that's grieving to process the emotions. If it takes a long time, that's okay. And if it takes longer than someone else, that's okay too. You don't have to have it look like someone else's grief. Grief is not the one common thing about grief is there are stages, but everyone goes through them differently and everyone experiences it differently. And it's a journey to get healthy and to process it and to take the time to really let yourself feel it. Because the quote that I wanted to pull out for this chapter or this section is the only way to begin to heal is to allow yourself time to feel. And you have to feel the feelings. You can't rush them. I know too many people that have tried to stuff the grief and it comes out in these horrible ways, whether they an addiction or there's all sorts of things like you have to walk through it. And so give yourself grace, take time, don't try to live into someone else's expectations of what it should look like. It's going to look like how you need it to be for you and ask God to guide you and show you. What would you say to that? Give yourself time and grace.
Yeah, and I love everything that you just said, Jody, and I really liked we've heard the analogy of grief comes in waves like an ocean. You mentioned that in your book as well. And it's true, those waves come fast and hard in the beginning, and then, as time goes on, you do still have those waves, but there's more time in between, they're not as powerful, and you know what you're a little bit more prepared for them. In the beginning,
Yes.
a wave comes and knocks you down and you just barely stand up before the next one hits you again.
Yes.
And then
Pounding
you
into
get
the
to the
ground.
point
Yeah.
where you learn how to stand and separate your feet and balance, and then the wave hits you and you're not knocked off guard as well as much as you were before.
I love
um
that.
I think the biggest thing I struggled with in grief is there was no space for my grief. You're grieving someone who's still alive. You're grieving the loss of someone who's still alive, and it's not widely recognized as grieving another.
Right.
Um,
It is
it,
true. It's more
yeah,
the death of
there's
a marriage. It's not the death of
exactly
a
nobody's
person.
going to bring you a casserole when you go through a divorce. It just doesn't happen. Um,
Yeah. I know.
so
I talk about that in the book. I call it the death without a funeral, because it is really
yeah,
true, Heather, that there are some deaths that aren't, no one's going to a funeral and saying their condolences, but it's just as real. But the grief is just as real as if someone physically died. It's just a
right.
different type of grief. So I love that you brought voice to that. Yeah. I didn't mean to interrupt you. What else were you going to say about that?
I I just think that we have to recognize that grief is not always what we think it is. You know, for example, I remember I was working in a senior living community at the time, and I actually wrote about this in a book that's coming out as a guest chapter later this year. So I'm excited about that. But I wrote about this parallel. I was working with this woman as her physical therapist, and both her and her husband. And the husband had dementia and he was fading, and he was still very
Mm,
much alive. They were still together, but the husband she knew didn't exist anymore. And she was
mm,
having such a difficult time processing her emotions. I mean, and this woman was in her
yes,
90s. You know,
I
people
know.
in
Mm,
this generation, they really didn't have the same access to mental health care. Um,
emotional literacy.
a
Yeah.
lot have changed. A
Yeah.
lot has changed since then. But I remember sitting down with her at one point in time, and as she's talking to me, I looked at her and I said, well, what you're experiencing right now is grief. You're grieving the loss of your husband. And when I said that out loud to her, it really hit me, because that's exactly what I was going through when I'm trying to figure out why I'm having all these ups and downs of emotions. And that's
Mm.
exactly what it is. We were both grieving the loss of someone who was still physically alive, but no longer existed in the capacity that we knew them.
Wow. That's really powerful, Heather. I'm glad that you just shared that. Sadly, my mom's walking through dementia, so I know this all too well, but it is true that grief isn't always someone passed away physically. Sometimes it's different. And I think we need to give people space to grieve whatever they're grieving, and give them grace and give them time, because it doesn't all look the same. And for that woman, her husband was different, and he wasn't there anymore in his, let me say again, for that one woman, it was grief, right? The loss of her husband. And so thank you for sharing that. I think that's so important that I just think a lot of people, I don't want to say judgy on grief, but like, I just think a lot of people want it to be in this little neat box. These are the way you do.
Mhm.
And it's like, grief isn't like that. It's such a journey. And so this section of the book, to be honest, is just allow yourself the space and time to grieve and process emotions and get healthy, because you have to do that in order to move on to these next parts. And so it's not a one and done. These are not steps that happen linearly. You kind of do this for a while, but I feel like this is such an important part of the book. And I'm so glad that you were here to share with me, Heather. Now, you were on my book launch team, and I know it's getting long-winded, so we're going to wrap this real quick. But I would love to hear from you, because it's just kind of fun. The book's birthday is about to happen. 1 year old, Depth's going to be, and I would love to hear from you. What was some of your favorite quotes or nuggets of truth from the book? If you could just share something, I would love it.
Well, my favorite part, Jody, I love the part you talk about the pottery and the cracks, and how, that's not, we hear all the time, the cracks is where the light comes in, or, I don't know what is the Japanese art form that I
Oh,
know we talked.
kintsugi, kintsugi.
Yes. And that is just so beautiful to me. And I know we've had this conversation, you and I, before, but that has really resonated with me even before you and I connected. I had actually ordered this necklace. I don't have it with me right now because I'm on vacation, but it was a kintsugi necklace. And that was what it symbolized to me, is that even though things were broken, there can be beauty even with brokenness.
Mm,
And
I
the
love
fact that you talked about that in your book, I read those chapters multiple times because they just
that.
meant so much to me, because that was something that God had also revealed to me. And then to see it in your book that he had revealed it to you, I just love when God does that, when he shares things with multiple people, and then we see it and we relate to one another. And it's just beautiful how he weaves it all together.
I love that. Oh, that's the chapter on brokenness. That's my favorite one as well. Or one of my favorite. It's hard for me to say my favorite, but I have to say, when people ask me about things, I love the tree with the deep roots, but I also love the broken clay pot and the broken pottery. There's something God speaks to me in both of those things in such powerful ways. And I bought myself a little kintsugi pot, just so I can have one as well. It's actually on this table, but it's behind the computer, so I can't pull it out and show you. But I think it's so amazing how the gold is not, a lot of times people like to hide our cracks, but it's actually gold. The gold is there in the cracks to like bring light, not bring light to them, to what's the word I'm trying to say, to highlight them, to bring focus to them. And you're actually
Right.
more beautiful because of those cracks. And so if someone's listening right now, I want them to hear that their brokenness doesn't disqualify them. Listen, Heather and I both walked through something really hard, a divorce, and look at, we are using our heartbreak to help others. And Heather, I love that you're mentoring women. I love it so much. I'm just really excited, Heather, that you got to come on today. And thank you for being on my book launch team and supporting me over all these years with my podcast and my book, and just being here to share this exciting time as the 1 year birthday happens. So thanks for coming on today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor.